Welcome to The Best Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Bradley H. Werrell, and we're here to explore options and potentials to help us grow as individuals and as a community with one another in these difficult times and challenging times. We're exploring all manner of potentials related to the human experience: physical, psychological, medical, spiritual. It's a wonderful opportunity that we now experience in this critical phase of our human evolution. And I welcome you to join us in our podcast, become more aware, and identify with people who are helpful and supportive of you in your efforts as a human being on this planet and elsewhere too. We're going to be meeting people who are doing things that are widely variant from what is so-called normal within our society, in the creative space, within the social space. Our common purpose, seeking to generate positive potentials to improve the lives of everyone in our sphere of influence, and to expand that sphere of influence so that we may positively influence others that are not yet engaged directly with us. That's the goal here. We will learn more about each other as we go. I wish you the very best. Thank you very much for tuning in. Welcome to today's episode of The Best Medicine with Dr. Bradley H. Werrell, your host. That's me. Today we're going to meet the esteemed professor, Dr. Gregg Henriques from James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Dr. Henriques is notable for having generated a transformative theory of knowledge, which will be discussed in this podcast. I want you to know that I found this information to be so utterly useful in interactions with my patients that within a day, it had altered the conversation I have with patients in a positive way. So I cannot recommend highly enough that you study this work of this fine gentleman. And with that, we may begin the podcast. Thank you for your attendance.
All right, sorry about that. I closed my, we had a curtain put up in case people are doing laundry in the back.
Oh, okay.
So,
Very good. So we have Gregg Henriques. He's a professor of psychology at JMU in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And,
yes.
And it's like this, you do clinical psychology too, as I understand.
Yes, that's what my training is. I consider myself, thanks for having me here. Yeah, I'm a professor at James Madison University. I've been there since 2003, where I'm part of a combined integrated doctoral program that produces psychological practitioners in clinical school psychology. And my training is in clinical psychology. My passion certainly tends, although I do have done a lot of clinical work historically, a lot of supervision, things like that. My passion also is in sort of theoretical psychology and what might be a more unified vision for our field, which is a very convoluted field, psychology is, and lacks much in the way of consensus or sort of deep shared clarity of thought.
That seems a very reasonable description of it. I studied geology as an undergraduate. And I did take a psychology class and I got hammered because it's like this. It's like it's so abstract and multiple competing theories and I'm like, how can you have so many theories that all make sense and not integrate very well? And I'm like, that disturbed me as a scientist. And I'm like, well, I didn't do well. And I'm like, okay.
Right. So that's what I call, by the way, the problem of psychology. In fact, that's been present pretty much since the field really got started. So the field starts in the mid-19th century. Its official birth date is when Wilhelm Wundt opens his lab in 1979. And it gets started as initially what the meaning of the word psychology means to the Enlightenment folks at the time is your subjective experience of being. And so Wilhelm Wundt starts to look at that building off what's called psychophysics, and then he develops people to be trained introspectionists. So you report on your inner subjective experience. But then the term evolves, and other people say, no way, that's not a good frame. You know, that's becomes what's called a structural approach. Then there are functional approaches. Then there are behavioral approaches, and then there's psychodynamic, Freudian approaches. And then we're off and running. In fact, by 1927, it's identified as a crisis by a famous psychologist, a Russian psychologist by the name of Lev Vygotsky, and it's never been resolved. So we don't know what we mean. I like to say nobody knows what they mean by psychology. And that's one of my passions as a scientist. I actually want to know what I'm talking about.
That's interesting. So I'm a primary care physician, and I'm interested in psychology. My uncle was a psychiatrist in Lexington, Kentucky, and he was a Jungian kind of guy, and so he got me interested in I hooked up with the Erickson Foundation here in Phoenix.
Okay, good.
Which is I live about say 90 miles out of town. Mm-hmm. And so I worked with those guys and trained with them a little bit. And so I've hooked up with a psychoanalytic school in Liverpool, the International Psychosystems Analysis people. And I've been working with them and trying to understand how to, it's clinical psychotherapy, they're training clinical psychotherapists. And it's like the interesting function of it is it's caused me to brush up against ideas and considerations that are otherwise you don't pay attention to them, the latent potentials, you know what I mean, in the psyche.
Of course. And
so it's like it's quite an interesting road trip because it's disturbing as well as enlightening. I think that's to the other side of the coin, right?
Well, right. I mean, they don't call it depth psychology for nothing, right? You're going to go into the dark, shadowy realm if you're going to take the Freudian Jungian route and open yourself up into that world. You know, it is absolutely fasten your seatbelt for some of the claims, especially if you're a hard scientist. Some of the claims begin to rub up against your logical system sometimes. But in terms of your phenomenological experience of being and the connections of the world and one's dreams and one's seething cauldron of rage and sexual impulses, it's a dark world out there, and there are many insights that are hard to let go of once you actually realize them and find them in yourself and whatnot. So it's a very powerful and important lens to bring to bear on the human condition, in my opinion.
That's right. And I became interested in, before I was a physician, I studied massage therapy. And I became very, very fascinated by what I regarded as the emotional holdings in the body as a pattern integrity. Mm-hmm. And release the association, so the attention patterns as manifestation of psychic tension. Mm-hmm. And the issue is so that's how I got interested in it and coming at it from the bottom up, like physicality into the psyche as a mechanism. But what really it caused me to reach out to you was that I saw your work with John Vervaeke, a professor in Toronto, I believe he is.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. And talking about your tree of knowledge approach, which I made a whole bunch of graphics off the net, and I have them on my desk because they were inspired me as I'm talking to a philosopher professor. You professors are trips because you're all way up here, okay, way super high up there, and all like I'm not as I don't know, verbose, I suppose. It's like so many words in books, right? And so, but I like this image that you made, this tree of knowledge system that you created.
Yep.
And I'm like this. The Dr. Scribina is the philosopher that I told him I wanted to talk to him. He gave me an assignment to read 2 books of his, which I had already started with the one, which was the Metaphysics of Technology.
Cool.
And then the second book is Panpsychism in the West. And it's like, and it goes to this tree of knowledge system that you've created. And what's fascinating is the image that you drew on that I just showed you is suggestive of that panpsychism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, because it's like when you see this, the beauty of this system that you've generated, it looks to me like a magnetic field coming out of a point, right?
Yep.
And it's like
Sure.
this, the limits of our liminal limits are shown, and you call these the syntheses and theories, where the consciousness appears to duck into the layer below. Mm-hmm. And it stems from the same common point, which is the I guess the Big Bang, right?
Sure. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So the panpsychist argument is that which is, I will relate this. It takes a little bit of time, but the panpsychist argument is the universe is conscious, and your consciousness is in reflective interaction with that consciousness.
Yep.
Okay, so we're on the same page. I don't know if that's...
Well, that's the panpsychic argument. There are lots of different variants of panpsychic versions, and they make different kinds of ontological claims. So it's important to know, it's a pretty big set of ideas. You can find it in Whitehead, you can find it in elements of it in Bohm, you can find it in other, more explicit places. So there certainly is the issue of continuity. Okay, there is the tree of knowledge captures that diagram. This is the theory of knowledge tree behind me. It's a little complicated, but the first branch on it is the tree of knowledge. So that's there is a relation. But that there is that, sort of an energy continuity. Okay, so I have physicist friends who allow me to think about, and others certainly have said as much, that we can, at least for now, metaphysically claim or think about the Big Bang as a pure energy singularity. Okay. An energy magnetic radiant singularity that then differentiates, of course, a quantum fluctuation of some sort that creates a hot energy inflation. But what that basically then means is, I love the terms energy information as very, very ubiquitous, powerful terms, okay, that create a continuity. So energy information, to think about panpsychism and think about matter in terms of its energy information elements, and then you get up into the complicated metabolic processes that you as a physician know about at the level of life, okay, and then you get into the neuro metabolic information energy processing at the level of animal, what I call animal mental or mind, and then you get into the linguistic energy information processing on top of that we're doing right here, okay. So an energy information continuity really is certainly what I embrace. And when you use that kind of language, then I'm very, in accordance with panpsychic kinds of views. Some panpsychic folks make the argument that we know that the universe itself, there's a cosmic consciousness. Some mystics make that claim as well. I'm agnostic about sort of the ultimate ontology of the universe and whether or not we should be thinking about the universe as conscious or not in its entirety in terms of cosmic consciousness. There are a lot of really cool claims and ideas in relationship to that. I'm a scientist. I find some of those metaphysical claims to extend beyond what we know, and therefore I drop into agnosticism in relation. And the goal of the tree of knowledge is really to get our modern empirical natural scientific knowledge in better shape. The physical world into the biological world is okay in terms of its conciliant organization. And like I said at the beginning of this thing, you get into the mental, psychological, behavioral world, okay? Like your profession will often call it behavioral health, It's like, okay, well, or mental health, or mental behavioral health. What do you actually mean by those terms? And then you find that people have all sorts of different ideas about what those terms refer to and why. So then everything breaks down at the level of our linguistic coherence after biology into neuroscience. Psychology breaks it all down. So what I'm saying is that actually with the tree of knowledge, we can bring coherence to the mental, psychological, into the social sciences and achieve a much better picture of natural science all the way from physics to sociology than we have achieved up to this point. And that's what my passion is at that level.
There you go. So we're operating in the same vein in a parallel pattern, which is the IPSA, the International Psychosystems Analysis people use a model by Engel called the biopsychosocial model.
Yep.
And so we're on the same page. So it's like that. The issue is then, so according to that framework, one of the key tenets of the that organization, IPSA, is that it's he calls it dialectic syncretism. Okay, so so we have to come to terms with what we're talking about, so that we agree with that we're talking about the thing we're talking about in a fashion so that we can adequately communicate, which is what you're actively doing. That's
what I'm actively doing. In fact, so Engel's model. So you have there's biomedical disease models for physicians, and then there's biopsychosocial models. Okay, so how do we think about health? What's the role of say physicians and other health professionals, and what is the idea? Okay, so a classic biomedical idea hones in on biology and identifies as malfunctions that cause harm or diseases, and those are the pathologies that physicians ought to fix. Okay, then a lot of people then say, and Engel certainly among them, and I think any psychiatrist, once you get into psychiatry, you have to say, that's way too reductive. Health issues are far more broader than that. They're nested in different systems, and we can analyze those systems across different levels of analysis. And at some level, there's a biological, psychological, and social level of analysis that we can bring to bear to understand people's health, illness, health continuum. Okay, and actually psychology, the American Psychological Association, adopts essentially Engel's biopsychosocial model in its training. So all of the training and education, we have to learn and train our students in biological bases of behavior, okay, cognitive, affective, and developmental bases of behavior, which then corresponds to the psychological dimension. In other words, individual, small group levels, and then social cultural dimension influences of behavior, which then sit into the systems that we are situated in, the cultural values. If you're familiar with Uri Brofenbrenner's work, you know a socio-ecological frame. If not, it's the layers of nested systems that we're embedded in, essentially. So Engel's work's unbelievably influential, and I'm a supporter of it. What you look from my angle, I'm an egghead academic, so I always, sorry, but you zone into actually what people mean, and my assertion holds is actually in Engel's model, we don't know what psychology means. Okay, so you don't really have a framework. The term shifts in its reference points, and it's unbelievably confusing. And there is no coherent metaphysical system of understanding that allows you to actually delineate, say, the difference between biology, the biological level, the psychological level, and the social levels of analysis with any degree of consistent coherency. That's the problem with the sciences in general. So you can use it from a practitioner standpoint, because then you're dealing with reality. You have to help people. You can use the language as tools. But when you actually then go back to epistemological claims at the level of science, then you need a level of, that means, what do you actually justify as knowledge? Then you actually need to determine the validity of your terminology in relationship to consensus and other kinds of metrics. And that's when everything breaks down.
I understand you. It's an interesting function there. The epistemological claims, it's an interesting function because it's like this. It's like the output of practical output, regardless of claims, is what I would point to as a definition of adaptation. Because it's the adaptation versus maladaptation, right? It was kind of the standard I would use as a mechanism to judge behavior in the context of all these nested systems.
Brilliant. Yep.
And the issue is that I'm going back to the panpsychism because it strikes me as this Jungian thing, which is like this. I was, when I was studying massage therapy, I was alone out in the far away from my family and no friends, and I was in this small class, and I had a lot of time and no money, so I was spending a lot of time thinking. Okay, so I'd walk around Portland, Oregon. I went to school there for about the summertime, and then the interesting thing was I came to this conclusion that I could not prove the existence of time or space without using the other in the equation.
Sure.
And I challenge the physicists every chance I get, is I'll give them gold and all of them walk away if they can prove one exists without the other. And it's like, so I call that position to be absolute subjectivism, okay? Which is, if you can't go anywhere because there's no place to go and there's no time to go there anyways, what's going on here, right? What exactly is going on here? Because you're always nested in the very center of your experience. So I found out later, I discovered phenomenology, and I go, that's me, I'm an absolute phenomenologist. And it's like, we're doing all these motions and we're achieving some ends in the world. And that's the adaptation to the environment. We create the environment we're in and it's in a conscious collaboration with the environment that we generate our experience. And so I point to, Jung calls that, I would call that, everything that I don't call me is the unconscious. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's like, so therefore, all the messages I get are coming from the unconscious and directing my behavior in some fashion or my interaction. And I study Hebrew accidentally, okay? This is kind of funny because it's like, I studied for 3 years what happened to America. And it goes down this crazy conspiracy wormhole. And out of the other side, I decided oddly to look up this word, the bush, that's referenced in the Bible twice that I'm aware of. The bush that caught Abraham's ram and the bush that is the burning bush that Moses talked to God on, like a cell phone. And I'm like, this is the direct intervention of God in the affairs of men. I'm like, what? How do you say bush in Hebrew? That was the beginning of my Hebrew lesson. And it turns out it's the second part of the first word of the Bible in Hebrew. Okay, the word is brashit. Okay, and it means, breaks into two words, bara and shit. Shit is the bush. And shit, the bara is to make, and the second word is shit is discourse. And so like it says everything you need to know. It's generate, and they translate it in English as Genesis. And it is the generative function that you see in your image here, the tree of knowledge is that's the generative function. And that's what we're engaged with. And I regard that as that points to that panpsychism. Yep. Again. And so that's kind of, that's what I'm interested in, is this generative function, interaction, and then how do we smooth it out so that people can smooth out their course? Because I know in any clinical environment, you run in the people that got dense, beat up around the edges because their maladaptations are causing them irritation and they're not figuring out how to unwrinkle it.
Absolutely.
And so that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm like, I'm interested in that.
So this is a central concern of the unified theory of knowledge. This is actually, you just opened up so enormous amounts of parallels here. So what the thing that starts me on my journey into this new world of seeing the world the way I now do, it goes back to 1996. I had shifted. I'd seen in graduate school, I get exposed, just like you discussed. I'd been exposed to it, but when you actually become a practitioner, all the different paradigms and their cacophony of different voices, and the idea you would choose one or become eclectic. That was basically, and there had just been some patterns about, like about 10 years old or not even, that were starting a systematic integrative process of the psychotherapies, this an integrative psychotherapy movement. So anyway, but then I was like, I'm a natural scientist at heart. That's what I was raised as. So I think, so I'm like, well, why wouldn't it be that the psychological therapies would be grounded in the human psychologies, right? You have the science of human psychology that are describing and explaining the phenomena of interest. And then we're going to utilize those in practical reality, just like medicine really is anchored to human biology. I mean, modern medicine's that way. And then it was in that frame that I went back to the question of what psychology is. And that's when I was like really internalized, oh my God, we really don't know what this term means.
How profoundly disturbing was that for you?
That's very disturbing. When you're actually like, I'm a psychologist, I'm trying to be a scientific psychologist, and I'm looking, but the field does is it shifts your attention over to empirical methods. It allows you to find yourself as a scientist because you employ empirical methods. And I bought that argument because I bought what evolved in science is, science is an empirical methodology. That's what I thought. And it's like, actually, if you don't have a coherent ontology, i.e. claims about what is real in relation, then you cannot just employ empirical methodology and get scientific knowledge. You actually have to have a grounding in some degree of ontological claims. The reason chemistry is a real science is because the periodic table of the elements, not just because of the methods they employ. And if we don't have a periodic table of what the heck we're talking about, then, it's just at even a base level of agreement, we're in deep trouble, okay? And then but I thought then I'd find it in evolutionary psychology. So there's a whole field called evolutionary psychology, which actually now does that naturalistic grounding, of which would be consistent with an cosmic evolutionary panpsychic group. It's like we're going to layer the stuff on top of the things that come before it in an evolutionary way, okay? It's brilliant and good stuff. But one of the things that evolutionary psychology doesn't do well at all, in my opinion, and it falls into one of the foundational conundrums. There are a lot of foundational conundrums in psychology, but one of this is the animal-human conundrum, okay? So, like, what is exactly mental behavioral processes at the animal level, okay? Like primates, they obviously have enormous mental behavioral processes. I would argue all the way down to insects have mental behavioral processes, okay? Versus humans, okay? So what is that distinction exactly, all right? And I stumbled into, and the first thing that people will say, which is a good distinction, is that, well, we talk in a different kind of way. So human communication, human linguistic communication is different than animal communication. Animal communication is very sophisticated, but there's something different about human language, okay? And that's right, in my estimation. Okay, and many people have said that. I mean, when you try to talk about what is it that makes us distinct, human language is almost always one of the first elements. But what people tend to emphasize with language, and what I had sort of internalized until I saw it differently, was they emphasize the unbelievable advantages of language in opening up communication, coordination, and cognitive capacity. So once you have language, then you do jump into a whole nother set of potentials. That's right, in my estimation. But they just talk about it in terms of its advantage, okay? They don't talk about it in terms of all of the problems that come with that new space, okay? So what I then inverted was, instead of just thinking about this as it's unbelievably great cognitive advantage, gives us this communication and cognitive gadgets and reasoning, is I realized that actually, and as a clinician, I was poised to see this, is that, okay, so we open up this highway of linguistic information to each other, right? Okay. And now what we have to do is we have to share our propositions. So what my argument is that before we mimic each other and we have symbols, there, antelope, okay? We bang on drums, we do lots of stuff to coordinate, okay? But then there's a tipping point about 100,000 years ago, maybe 150,000, maybe 50, we're not really sure exactly. But there's a tipping point where you shift from antelope there to there are the antelope, okay? Now that is different in the sense that there antelope is an associative claim, okay, that doesn't actually make a propositional claim. Indeed, if you look at what sort of the cognitive science of language, it's propositions that are fundamental units of meaning. And the reason is because they then make clear factual statements, okay, that then can be corresponded with states of affairs, okay? So there are the antelope is now a propositional statement that makes a corresponding fact claim that then opens up counterfactual claims, and that opens up a whole bunch of negative dialectic space. That's the technical term for it, okay? But basically says, well, how do you know, and is it important, and why should we go over there and hunt those as opposed to go hunting the rabbits that are over in these trees, okay? So in common language, what I'm saying is that once you get propositions, you get question-answer dynamics, okay? All right, now this is the tipping point, okay? Notice question-answer dynamics are discourse dynamics, okay? Okay? And what the questions do, once you have propositions, very quickly questions will follow, or they'll follow almost in tandem. And questions are cognitively easy. What do I mean by that? Hang out with a 3 or 4-year-old. Precocious. Okay? You know? Why, Dad? Why are you going bald, Dad? Why is the sky blue? Why do we eat cookies after dinner instead of before? You know, and you give a little answer at first, and then you quickly realize that's just because the way it is, kid. You know, right? Okay, because the why question, once you have available, can now become almost a habit, immediate, just an easy cognitive load that then creates a heavy cognitive load on the answer side. All right, that's true of all questions. So you get counterfactual space, and how, why, what, where immediately are easy, but then they create massively complicated dynamics. So this is what's called the problem of justification, okay? And the problem, when you get into it, the problem of justification has 3 fundamental elements, okay? The first can be called the analytic or accuracy element, which is, hey, this is a truth claim, and does it correspond to the state of affairs? So if I say the antelope are over there, does that match? Okay, so that's one thing. And that has pragmatic value, and it lacks pragmatic value if it doesn't correspond. Okay, so you have to make an accuracy claim at a basic level. And then the other 2 issues are what I call the personal and social dynamics of the claim, okay, which are, okay, so now we're making the claim. Why are we making it, and for whom are we making it, and what are the implications for whom in relation? Okay, right. All right. So that has personal implications, all right, and relational social implications, okay, that then really coordinate our adaptive behavior, because if the antelope are over there, all right, and then we go out and we find them, and then they're not there, okay, then we come back and add it, well, who said they were over there to begin with? That was what you said. No, I said they might be over there. You said that it sounded like they were, so that's why we went over there. Notice that? Okay, so now there's going to be all sorts of investment and influence claims about these propositions in the personal and social world, okay? All right, well, now you get that. Now you're going to get a whole different shaping feature of the human self-consciousness interpretive system, okay? The self-conscious language-based mediator between our private nonverbal thoughts, what we think about ourselves, and what we're going to say publicly to other people. Because we have the personal consideration and the social consideration. Socially out here is the public world, and privately is our personal consideration. And now we have to navigate the dynamics of the stories we tell ourselves and then tell other people about what is going on relative to the relational influence consequences of these actions, okay? So this is now you get into the real problem of justification, which are accuracy claims and the social dynamics and the personal dynamics, okay? That's a big deal, because now what you have is you have a model. Sorry, the phone's ringing back. You got a model that says, hey, the dynamics of private narrative and public narrative will be quite different.
So yeah, okay? Filtration has to occur.
Filtration. And there's filtration then. The argument has been, the Freudians love this because this is what it loops right back to, is that your private narrator is going to tell you one kind of story in relationship to your heart. So if you are at your core have biological impulses of sex and aggression, for instance, that is not socially acceptable, you may tell even yourself. So this opens up why you would have self-deception and what I call the Freudian filter, okay? And then what you decide to tell other people. As a clinician, consider how often I hear people say, I feel like an imposter. I show people one thing, but deep down inside, I feel a different way, or I feel inadequate, but I have to maintain my public image. Okay, well, that's what I call the Rogerian filter between the private narrator, because we fear judgment, we fear the impact of our action, and so we manage our face out here. And those filtering between private to public and then private to experiential, okay, are absolutely essential, both to understanding the science of human consciousness and its various domains, and understanding the clinical implications of how When you're harmonized with your heart, your head, and the relational world, life's going great. You're known and valued for who you are. You can be honest. Your narrator's like, this is what I want. And I talk to people, oh my God, life's going great. When your heart, your head, and your relational world are out of sync and in conflict, you come see me as a clinician and sorting it out. Okay.
That's right. That's right. You said there were three aspects of the problem of justification. You could say the analytic problem, the personal social dynamic problem. There's a third.
Well, okay. So personal and social. Okay.
That's two.
So that's two separate ones. So it's personal in relationship to other. And then the social does get into, because these are all the elements of the system. Then the social gets into, well, what do we really do as a group? So then that becomes another level of analysis. Okay.
Yeah.
So that one loops into two different ones.
Yeah. I get you. I just wanted to clarify that because I'm like, I don't want to leave the shoe hanging.
No,
the listeners want to know. They want to know what you're thinking, man.
Well, those are the three.
Work. That's good thinking, though. That's excellent. Because it all very, very neatly explains the circumstance that we all are nested in. As far as I'm concerned, there's no question, but that is an accurate way to look at it. And
there's a picture that comes with that. There's a map of what I call the updated tripartite model. I don't know if you have methods for me sharing screens. I could certainly.
Oh, wait, I'll make you the host for a minute here. Let's do that. Okay. Let's see, I'm not the greatest. Let's see here. If I can figure it out. Let's see.
If you go to participants and you go over my name.
Yeah.
And then you go under more. Then you should be able to make me co-host.
There you go. Now you can share the screen. Okay. You're the host.
Great. Okay. So what I'm sharing with you here is called the updated tripartite model. Okay. And I should have it available to me, but right now
I close my door.
Okay.
Okay. We'll see how well organized your files are, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is where we can start if we see this. Okay. Updated tripartite model. So that's a clear reference to Sigmund Freud's tripartite model of persona of id, ego, superego. Okay. It's updated in that it's got a lot of different elements to it, but it certainly corresponds. There will be what Freud saw and what we are seeing here aligns significantly. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm updating Freud and placing him in a scientific context of the 21st century. Okay. So there are three domains of human consciousness, according to this. One is phenomenology and the experiential self. Okay. So this is the intersection of our first-person experience of being in the world, the intersection of our exterior senses, our interior senses, and our affect that gives rise to a global, I like a global neuronal workspace, okay, kinds of notions, which is completely contained, okay, from our own epistemological perspective, what I call the interior, and this is off of Ken Wilber. This is your interior epistemological perspective on the world. Okay, which no one else has direct access to and can never have. That's when kids say, how do I know that the red you see is what I see? And it's dawning on them that there's an epistemological gap in phenomenology. Okay, and that is what now where does the experiential self come from? Well, all of the neurocognitive processes of the unsub non-conscious matrix of the brain behavior relation. Okay, so you get the experiential self. Okay. Then the private self refers to the narrating function mediated by language that feeds back on to the phenomenological self. Okay. So this is when you start talking to yourself. All right. And think about yourself from a, there's a reason that there's a tie between language and self-conscious reflection. Okay. And the public self. This is what you project to others and let them see. Okay, so this is the basic tripartite model. All right, and what you get here is you get these little things are filters. Now, what I'll do is I'll extend this a little bit and come down and show you. Flip through. I grabbed the slightly wrong one, but this will be clear. Okay, so if we come down here, all right. And what this shows is, okay, here are the three, and then there's filters between the two. So you have the experiential self, the Freudian filter tracks that, the Rogerian filter, and of course we're engaged in other connections with other people, all right? And we exist in a context of justification, okay? This is the rules of society, what society says is okay, what we are socialized into, what people say, hey, yeah, this is what is justifiable and this is what's not, okay? So I'll go ahead and stop sharing there, but I can send you a copy of that. You can put it up in the show notes if you have those types of things.
That's cool. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, so the interesting function is it's like this contest, it's like this, the contest there is occurs that we're in a contest for this, what you're calling the context of justification.
Mm-hmm.
That's the conflict point. And it's like, that one's getting ugly, man.
That's exactly right. So where there's a complete breakdown, okay, in the context of justification. You can talk about them and to use the word like sort of cultural paradigms. These are the models about what we think is okay and what legitimizes yes and no. And so what's happening in our current, why is this a current, I call it the age of confusion, okay? Because the old models of justification, which were adequate for the 20th century, okay, are now, everything is changing so much in terms of our access to knowledge, and most notably, by the way, by the digital world, and I can explain why the digital world is so central to this unbelievable unfolding and collapsing or chaotic inducing elements to our paradigms. But that's exactly right. Our context of justification is wobbling and flying around. And people need that to know what they are, know what their identities are, know how to relate. And as a function of that, our society is going crazy, basically. I mean, there's no, people can't figure out how to make sense out of who. So they see bad guys and good guys, and everything is changing, and there's no consistency and predictability. Everyone gets all anxious. Kids don't know what to believe because everything's changing so fast. They don't know who they are going to be in this chaotic mess. And so you get a huge amount of breakdown.
Interesting. There's a good book by Strauss and Howe, I believe. I keep losing the reference in my brain. It's the fourth turning, and it's like every 4 generations there's a recurring cycle of.
Yeah, I'm familiar with this.
Okay, very good. So for the audience though, it's like hero generation, and then a visionary generation. I don't remember the exact characterization of the generations, but they're 4.
Right, and then there's a breakdown and then a rebirthing, basically.
Right, and it's like, so we're we happen to be at the stage of the breakdown, which will last occurred around the time of the Great Depression. And it is this, the interesting function of it is this, and my assessment of it is that interested parties seek to influence the control of what I call the receiver, which is the system is bankrupt, which in a financial sense, we would recognize it as the people have been promised things that they will never be delivered.
Right.
And everybody knows it. And so they withdraw consent from this tree of the social structure that has been created, elaborated over the generations. And so it collapses into liabilities and assets that is the seed that will be the thing that springs forth with the next generation.
That's right.
And so the conflict is who gets to be the receiver.
Right.
Because the receiver controls the seed and therefore the generation of the social system that will be elaborated. And so we have this is the truly troubling part of it. And this goes back to my what happened to America question. Mm-hmm. The issue is there's interested parties that are actively seeking to drive the public in a direction. And they use psychological coercive measures to do so.
Absolutely. Totally.
And so it points back to, I point at Antonio Gramsci, a famous Italian Marxist, who said, he called it cultural hegemony. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, this is what we're talking about. And it's like, so I'm like, this is like, and I look at it as essentially psychological warfare to control the public for the purposes of those elites that are in the institutions or commanding the institutions, right?
So Daniel Schmachtenberger is somebody I follow.
Oh, yeah.
And he called it, basically that's exactly right. It's just an info war. He actually labeled it a little dramatically, World War III. But we are in the midst of an absolute information, power grab. There is, because now things are break. So my other friend Jordan Hall, he calls this the blue church. So what you just described, so that's the blue church. Yep. So the tree of knowledge, actually, the diagram tells you that the fourfold 80, every 80 years thing, that's actually not the tidal wave that we're on. It's just, yes, we're on that, but we're on a wave on top of that in a way that's just totally different. Okay.
We're in agreement. We're in 100% agreement.
So this is, but we are in the midst of according to tree of knowledge, we're in the midst of a literal phase shift on the order of what turned us from primates into people.
That's right. No question about it.
So it's like, so the question fundamentally, is, can we thread the needle and get the word out for how do people wake up, okay, in the right way?
That's right.
To transition the enormous actual wealth that we have potentially available to us. We have an enormous amount of wealth eventually. But if we go crazy and get defensive and hate everybody and then try to engage in warfare, we'll destroy it. Okay. So the question is, we have for me, I thought we had about 20, 30 years. And now after the pandemic, which is an unbelievable accelerant, okay, that changes whatever were potentially in store a year ago now have jumped up of a level of vibration as a function of the pandemic. So the timeline is really shifting. So I'm feeling very both excited about the opportunities. In fact, there's more attention to my work these days than ever. But at the same time, really scared that the timeline for what we actually have available, when the wealth we have and the potential we have to still harmonize with the planet, with each other, and define a new state of being in this world that's sustainable and cultivates dignity, well-being, and integrity, I don't know. That's a huge issue. And certainly my mission is to try to add my little golden thread.
We're on the same page, brother. We're on the exact same page. That's exactly the right mission, because it's like, okay, I got kids too.
Yeah, I got 3 kids. And we're all in this together. So.
That's right. I mean, here's the trick, man. The funny thing, so Skrbina's work, Dr. David Skrbina, the philosopher, panpsychism, he wrote the one on the metaphysics of technology, and there's easy to become very pessimistic. We're going to kill ourselves because we're not smart enough to run the machines, okay? And I'm like, okay, that undervalues the potentials of consciousness. Because consciousness can shift like a quantum dot, right? Boop. Suddenly it's here as the inspiration arrives, and we figure out how to run the show without killing each other and everything else too. And I have, you kind of have that thing, that danger and opportunity, I think, are the same character in Chinese.
Yes, that's exactly right.
May you live an interesting time is a curse. And I'm like, here we are.
We are. Check the box, brother.
I was like this. When I was in my 20s, I was like, no, that sounds good. I'm like, yeah, I'm not. Now I'm in my
right now we're on the top of this roller coaster, and I have no idea if we got guardrails on this thing. So it's a little anxiety provoking.
It is anxiety provoking, right? But it's anxiety provoking, which is like a good emotion because it causes you to change.
Absolutely.
And so it is. So
if you channel it in the right way, a lot of people, of course, get defensive when they get anxious. So this is our big challenge, okay, is to identify the anxiety, achieve awareness and acceptance, and then utilize it to yoke to the opportunity in the right way. Many people do, of course, get frozen safety behaviors and defensive in anxiety. And that's what my fear is. And then people manipulate that, and that's bad. But if we can catch it early enough, and we can yoke together in the right attitude with the right values, we could use it as the proper energy to do the necessary things to change.
Right, and the issue is this: that the last thing the people that control the institutions, the social institutions, want is that change.
Right, because
it's a natural antagonism towards change, especially if you're the winner of the old game.
Of course, it's institutional inertia. People have achieved their influence and their place in relationship to the rules that they had, and that's what they're holding on to the status. And now all of a sudden to say, just like, why did my work not get more attention inside psychology? Every individual I ever talked to at an individual level, it's like, oh my God, that makes perfect sense. okay? And no one, I mean, I figured that I really did crack the nut, okay? But at an institutional level, what the message to the rest of the institution is like, actually, guys, for the last 50 years, you've been doing some good work, but really you've been building up a whole bunch of system that actually needs a foundational underhaul, okay? So which would then put in jeopardy all the claims that you made. I call it the sandcastle problem. So people have been building sandcastles, and it's brilliant, but they'll wash in with the tide, okay? And no full professor wants to basically be like, oh my God, I've been teaching now it's a sandcastle in the context of a totally new foundational system. I can see that at a private level. No way. You get the institutional inertia that's trying to maintain its equilibrium.
Rogerian Filter there.
Yeah, totally. And then you do collectively. So then you get all the power brokers who are sitting on the Blue Church institution, and no way they're going to give it up. So the issue fundamentally is hopefully we have the time for a developmental intergeneration. So kids out there, I stopped talking to the professors and started talking to the children. Okay, so this is the children. And then it's hopefully we have enough time to develop the children, get seers together, realize we have a serious intergenerational problem. My friend Zach Stein calls it, we're in a time between worlds and we've lost teacherly authority to generate the narrative for the next generation. Okay, so that's where we're in. So we have to find seers that see what's going on, okay? Then yoke them together and get the educational and institutional infrastructure prepared for a phase shift, and then train the kids about what's happening, hopefully while the system doesn't collapse in the interim. I mean, that's the basic, task of this, this is the big road that we're on.
Atlas.
Yeah, exactly.
Look up, big boy, it's big world.
I know, and here comes the wave, and hopefully it doesn't hopefully there's a guardrail on this roller coaster so we can say, woohoo, this is somewhat fun. But obviously we're already seeing the number of people that are suffering and confused and all this other stuff. There's going to undoubtedly be a lot of suffering, but hopefully a lot of hope as well. That's the fingers crossed, and we just have to
I guess the issue, the concern that I have, and it will be go to the Babylonian control system, okay? Babylonian control system with the Magi and the sorcerers, okay? So Magi, good magic, usually that's you. You're trying to generate a good influence to help people at a distance. The sorcerer's job is to summon demons and control them through their superior knowledge of evil. And it's like, oh, that's problematic, right? Because it's like all these troubled souls, they can be whipped into a frenzy that will cause some kind of unpleasantries, which is what I'm concerned about. And it's like, I'm confident there is some of that going on.
Oh, I think you could be very confident that there's quite a bit of that going on.
I'm not going to make an argument to the contrary. So Jung talked about it. In 1941, he wrote an article in the midst of World War II, or it was a lecture in his works. I read that lecture in Geneva, and he said the answer to the masked man, which is the communists and the Nazis, which are doing this thing right in front of his face in 1941, is individuation. So that's what we offer. I think the game is to help people figure out how to sort their thing out for themselves and not be ideologically possessed.
And we absolutely need that. So there's a bottom up at the individual level. Okay, so and then there's some sort of coordinated system at the top down level, so you can actually begin. We humans do need our systems of justification. Okay, because there are always going to be macro level forces that are operative. All right, so we need individuals to step outside of the chaos. Don't be hijacked. Okay, by the paradigm wars. Okay,
the vernacular for the kids is don't be triggered.
Okay, right. Well, if you're triggered and you believe, let me put it this way: if you believe that there's a standard socio-political ideology that's been around for a long time, knows exactly what truth is, and knows that the opposite of what it fights against is anti-truth. If you believe that, you've been sold a bill of goods. Okay. That's it. And all of the established systems, my message, is out of date. In fact, I know that the science that we had from the Enlightenment is already out of date. That's science. You think that the Democrat versus Republican version of reality, there is definitely wisdom in the dialectic of those systems. And I'm a lifelong Democrat. But the point of it is that the whole system now is corrupt. That the entire process of governance has become corrupt. So if you are latching on to a socio-political movement that's embedded in the current system, well, you're basically an arm, in my estimation, a reactive blind arm to a corrupt system. And so be wary of that. because underneath that system are the power brokers that are pulling demons, and so we need individuation that then really says, wait a minute, if I put my chips on a team and that team is trying to froth my team up and define against some other team, I'm now basically an arm in an existing justification system that's probably inadequate, which means, yeah, I lack individuation. So you have to wake up and step out and start the process of your own sense making and go out and hang out with your neighbors and see that actually when you talk to your neighbors, all of a sudden all this ideological stuff that sits on social media and politics, like, hey man, yeah, we have some differences, but man, let's have a Coke or a beer together and just see the world, and I want to love you and you want to love me in the broad sense, and that's almost everybody. And so it's a really, there's so much potential for much more sanity once you individuate, and so we need that. We also need, to generate the generator function at the macro level. That's certainly what I work on. So behind me is the picture of a garden, and really it's a socio-ecological garden, which says, hey, take care of your garden at the appropriate scale. Okay, right. So, move into your life, individuate, do what you have to do to manage yourself towards dignity, well-being, and integrity, and your family, and the best that you can do. And then to whatever extent you have to contribute at whatever higher level to, can contribute. So I have an angle on contributing a particular, position of knowledge that then bridges over into psychotherapeutic well-being. And that's an important bridge, and I'll contribute that, and other seers are contributing other things. And hopefully we'll be able to weave this together in some sort of tapestry that actually, holds the system both from bottom up and top down.
100%. It's like generating social systems that function properly, that achieve desirable social results.
Yep, exactly.
And for individuals. And it's like that's the right answer. And certainly bottom-up approach is the right answer. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect much help from any institutional source.
No.
Okay. The real kicker. So as a physician, they've institutionalized all the physicians, right. And it is quite an irritating phenomenon. Okay. It is. I call it very irritating and sublimely motivating. Right.
Well, I'm in the process. This year, I have to decide whether to give up my license. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm seriously considering giving it up.
I understand.
Because
make it work for you, or it doesn't work for you.
It just is. I'm just so outside of the systems that try to jam the boxes in, and how you're going to make money, and how you're going to follow these rules, and and it's just like, sorry, folks, you guys are just playing by the wrong playbook, and I just can't.
We're in agreement now. So this is my job. So they've institutionalized me. I had a private practice, but they pay the hospital 3.5 times for me to do the same job in the same building with the same people, if the hospital is the commander. So now I'm an employee, and I lost control, and it's like, oh, it's so much more irritating. They pay me better because I get paid, right. But it's like this. It's like, but it rubs me raw the wrong way every day, and it's like this. I train on CrossFit, okay. And it's like the coach is like 71-year-old guy. He's awesome. Mm-hmm. And he goes like this. He goes, we're going to do 2 minutes of whatever it is. And you do as many as you can do. And I'm like, okay. So you have to recruit parts of your dormant, latent potential, biological potential to do it just because but anyway, he goes, you're not going to get your breath. It's going to be very irritating. Get used to it. And I'm like, so the psychic irritation I feel from working as a clinical physician inside the system is necessarily irritating, and it's unavoidable, and it will never go away. So get used to it and be productive within that framework. That's what they're paying you so much money for. And I'm actively seeking, the motivational part is I'm actively seeking to generate a cash-only telemedicine service, because that's my, and it's like, that's the right answer, and it cut the costs quite significantly and provide the service. That's my plan. And I'm like, inside a broader context, which I call to generate such positive systems as we're talking about. So I'm trying to create an institutional framework from that basement level of people, just from the people. Because I don't see a better answer here. I'm like,
I completely agree. I mean, I think that, you know, I think in terms of, yeah, the institutional systems, I think we do have to look seriously at our values around issues of wealth. I mean, I'm in a really fortunate situation. I am and maybe I'm a full professor, tenured, so I get to, and then I get a lot of freedom to do my intellectual work. So I feel fortunate. But it is the case that the structures that we have put in place just are not, they're not sustainable at many, many different levels. And so thinking about different kinds of economic relations, other kinds of bartering relations. That's why I give up my license in part. I'd start a coaching online thing that doesn't have regulation, you know, in a particular way. The legalism of the profession, you know, it's worse in medicine, but it's bad in psychology, you know, and just a CYA kind of nightmare. It just is so toxic across so many different levels.
It's like you didn't mention it, right? So just for the audience, it's bad and worsening. Okay, it's a progressive chain, and it doesn't go in but one direction. It's like more control over everybody all the time.
Right, and this is the question. So we're on this Titanic. Part of the Titanic is going to double down, and those of us that see the Titanic hitting the iceberg somehow have to create, you know, an evolutionary structure. Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about the tree and a caterpillar, and then hopefully we'll, you know, turn into butterflies. You know, that's one thing. Or we ultimately work with the Titanic so that it turns its direction, and then we build the what's the myth of where you actually rebuild the ship while you're at sail. I can't remember. There's a famous sort of actually metaphysical question about what is the ship, but I'm blanking. Anyway. So anyway, yeah, we're seeing the very same thing at all those.
That's how about that, man. It's like, that's good. So it's good to connect with people that are like-minded. And this part of the process is dendrite formation, right? It's just.
That's exactly right. So here's the deal. Here's the way I envision where we are on this wave. Okay. So right before the Cambrian explosion, that's by the, you know, 550 million years ago, you had a pre-animal structure. Okay. And you had things like jellyfish. All right. So jellyfish are distributed neural nets. Okay. But in my version of the way I think, they're at the base of the mind dimension. Okay. Because they have distributed neural nets, but they haven't centralized the sensory motor systems unique then that can fuse together in the brain. And then you get a bilateral animal body and you start moving around. Now you get into the real base of a mind. Okay. In the way I use the term. So you jump up, okay? So what is happening now is we lay down a distributed information processing neural networks equivalent system with the internet, and we have artificial intelligence systems we're interfacing with them and they're not centralized yet, okay? So your friend that's doing the metaphysics of technology, so the tree of knowledge is a map of natural. You'll see there's nothing technology on there. Okay, human technology is not included in that map. So it'd be great. You bring them in and you say, okay, yes, actually, well, where are buildings and computers? It's like, well, they're actually not, this is not a map for that. This is where they fit. And now what's happening with material culture, it started with writing. So we externalized our symbolic thing. Okay. Then we expanded literacy in the printing press. That was a huge change. Okay. Massively. Then we started developing, Babbage develops the first thinking machine, okay, where we electronically begin the process of generating algorithms through electronics, you know? And now we're like, then in the 20th century, we really accelerated that, and then we laid down the internet, okay? So we're at what I call the fifth joint point. That's the top of the tree of knowledge, okay? So there's the culture person plane, which is now going to actually have information interface with material culture technology, i.e. the digital world, okay? So this is where we're like on the pre-Cambrian explosion, setting up the 21st century to be the process where the transition, okay, from culture to a digital metacultural system emerges. That's what the tree of knowledge says, is the map that we're at. And the reason is because we built now an independent information processing communication system. Okay, that's the miracle of the moment, is that we built a whole nother information processing communication system. And if you look at life, mind, and culture, that's what makes each one of those such dramatic phase shifts. Okay, so the way DNA, RNA stores information, builds proteins, and cells communicate with each other. Okay, the way the nervous system processes, stores information, and animals communicate with each other. the way humans create symbolic and tactical information and then talk to each other to build culture. Now we've got digital, okay? And that's why the blue church is now, the 20th century blue church is completely obsolete, okay? And it's only going to get faster and faster and more confusing. Right? So what we have to do is we have to take the metaphysics of digital technology, okay, and our understanding of that and then how it works in the real physical world, and a clear understanding of our natures all the way down, culture all the way in, okay, and have a wise fusion of those two things. That's what we, in order to right the ship,
right?
Okay, that's what that's the goal.
We're in 100% agreement here. There's no question that that is exactly what has gone on. But the interesting function is the blue church appears to have seek to gain control and to wishes to exert itself as to become the gods of man by manipulating of emotionality through these same technologies.
That's right. That's right.
When you look at the experiments that Facebook has done to manipulate emotionality in the news feeds, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I'd say, and it's artificial intelligence working against the public for the social.
Totally. I think what is it? The Social Dilemma that came out on Netflix. That's like Tristan Harris from Google comes out, talks about this issue enormously. And that's exactly it, is that the algorithm builders of Google, Facebook, I mean, good guys, whatever. I don't this thing is bigger than anybody can really think about, but the mechanics of capitalism and the digital and the desire for the inherent desire, fractal desire for control sets controlling systems up to then gain more control. That's a Pareto function. And so you have, why do you have all of these big systems? And then they're just going to eat what they can eat, okay? Our hope through conscious awareness is just to become aware and then step to the adjacent and get enough people individuated to wake up and then be like, oh my God, we have to network together so that these machines don't become the demons, okay? We're on the cusp of creating the gods that will turn into the devil and eat us, you know? I mean, we have to be wary about that. Definitely.
That's a perfect place to call this one a figure, because I'm like, that was good, man. That's where we're at. That's a challenge we have, and I think we have a wonderful challenge ahead of us, and it's good to be able to link up with you and spend a minute exploring your ideas and generating a positive.
We're just trying to go out there and build some gardens, friends.
That's
build
it, man. It's
across scale.
How about that, man? And the interesting thing is the scalability of it, right? So we'll scale it up and help everybody get a hand up and generate a positive social influence around them, and that's all we can ask for, and do our best.
That sounds like a worthy goal to me.
Well, I'm glad to be able to work with you, and I hope we can have another conversation later on.
I would welcome that. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll send you a copy of this if you like.
Yes, I'll share it on my listserv. Actually, I have an active listserv. They call it the Theory of Knowledge listserv. It's a discussion listserv. I'd be happy to put you on it. And if any of your listeners would like to contact me in dialogue.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, you have a great day, sir, and I thank you for your moments.
I appreciate the interview and enjoyed talking with you.
I want to thank you nice people for attending this edition of The Best Medicine with Dr. Bradley H. Werrell. And I want you to think about going to the website toksociety.org/home to study the Tree of Knowledge system as created by Dr. Gregg Henriques. I think it will add value to your life and perhaps to your social environment. And I think that everyone should benefit from the great work that has been done by Dr. Henriques. Thank you again for attending. Have a good day.